On April 23, 1985, the Coca-Cola Company officially released its new reformulation of the iconic Coca-Cola soft drink. The unofficial colloquial name given to this product was New Coke. This reformulation of the original soft drink had underwent extensive testing with focus groups with people in all different regions and areas of the United States, during which, in testing, it was revealed that in a blind taste test, most drinkers actually preferred the sweeter reformulation of New Coke compared to the slightly more bitter original taste without knowing what it was. And from there, Coca-Cola executives made the call to replace the old classic formula with the brand new one instead of selling the products separately. There was an initial success to the new formula. Coca-Cola had started seeing a moderate increase in sales and consumption after steadily losing market share to other companies like PepsiCo in the last few years. With the general public, at first, New Coke was a massive success. People enjoyed the more rich, deep, and rounded flavor of the new formula, but strangely, it would be the most hardcore consumers of Coca-Cola that were not so easily won over by the marketing and the new taste, particularly states in the South where Coca-Cola was the most deeply rooted in culture and where its most die-hard consumers were. Despite it testing really well with the overall soda drinking population at large and still being extremely popular, these hardcore people, however, were still not impressed. The sweeter taste of New Coke was off-putting to them, and it could be seen as an attempt to copy Pepsi when what made Coca-Cola special was its more real and soulful taste, according to them. It was even seen as a betrayal, something as staple as Coca-Cola, this one constant in the universe that never changed, actually did, and those most passionate about Coke Classic began boycotting or even sending in phone calls and letters to the company in disappointment. Eventually, years later, following the backlash and stagnating sales of New Coke, Coca-Cola tried to rebrand New Coke into Coke 2 and bringing back Coca-Cola Classic. After this, Coca-Cola Classic would be outselling New Coke and Pepsi by a massive margin, despite people objectively preferring the taste of New Coke. In 2009, Coca-Cola would be back to using the original formula before New Coke was even invented, and they had dropped the classic labeling entirely. Coca-Cola believes that they severely underestimated just how many people would be alienated from the product and brand by taking such a drastic change to the formula that made them so successful in the first place. In a summary, trying to make sense of what happened to the rise and fall of New Coke and why it eventually made its return to the original formula, this quote reads, "There is a twist to this story which will please every humanist and will probably keep Harvard professors puzzled for years. The simple fact is that all the time, money, and skill poured into consumer research on the new Coca-Cola could not measure or reveal the deep and abiding emotional attachment to the original Coca-Cola felt by so many people." By now, you can probably see what I'm getting at with this. Over the long history of Call of Duty Zombies, there has been passionate debate about this mode and all of its evolution, and more recently, we've experienced a real shift in the fundamental formula of COD Zombies. This era of games is Coca-Cola, this era is New Coke, and this one being the strange bridge between these two very distinct design formulas to the game mode. That's why I found it particularly interesting that for Black Ops 6 Zombies' initial marketing, a major selling point was a return to round-based zombies after an experimental period of changes to the core staples of what makes Call of Duty Zombies over the years. BO6 was touting itself as a return to form for the mode, and that was extremely effective. Fans were eager to see Call of Duty Zombies return to its roots a little bit, or at least it should have been that way. In fact, in an even more ironic twist, one of the most anticipated and desired features to return to Black Ops 6 Zombies was literally what fans started calling a classic mode. It wasn't enough to return to round-based zombies. Fans wanted classic zombies. The fact that it came back to what it was after a period of objective-based extraction and God knows whatever this is.
Sightlines will be obscured by piles of dead corpses.
What?
Zombies.
It seemed to be a step in the right direction at least, yet the community was left longing for an experience that more resembles the gameplay systems, vibe, and feel of the classics. And that is despite the modern zombies formula improving on a lot of gameplay systems objectively in many, many ways. Just like New Coke being objectively preferred to the original formulation over a wide audience of market testing, I'd also wager that if you had a group of people who've never played any COD Zombies before, and you had them play World at War or even Black Ops 1, and then play Black Ops 6 in current day, I would place my money that Black Ops 6 Zombies would be the generally preferred game mode by far. It's just more palatable on average. It's a little easier to initially get into, but you watching this video right now probably don't fall into that category. You are watching this, you're a hardcore enjoyer since you found it interesting enough to click on this video. I'm talking about the people who only watch an hour or two of YouTube a week at most and maybe play video games a couple of hours a week as well. I just think that New Zombies has a lot more to offer these kinds of people, at least on surface level. It's got a lot more to do seemingly with the gameplay systems, camo grinding, side content, Easter eggs, weapons, and so on. I think modern zombie systems would be chosen by the average person 8 times out of 10. However, for the hardcore enjoyer, the die-hard zombies fan that helped shape the community into what it is, I doubt they would prefer the new formulation despite some of its objective improvements, because what you gain in function, market research, palatability, and taste, you might lose in soul, spirit, and character. It comes down to the difference of something that was made for a specific kind of person versus something that was made to appease the masses and appeal to the widest group of people possible. Now, why exactly do I consider this game to be the true start of the New Coke formulation? That's because it would be the first game to reject many of the systems and core mechanics of the games that came before it and rethink them to be more enjoyable and palatable for people to get into theoretically. Speaking from a big picture perspective, I would categorize classic Zombies as a co-op wave survival game with a focus and emphasis on the surviving. That includes, but is not limited to, resource management, sandbox elements, limiting the player in various ways, and keeping the threat of the undead an increasingly overwhelming task to fend off, but more importantly, it's survival that is the key core focus and gameplay loop. But of course, what made Zombies kind of interesting and really special are those ever elusive and hidden secrets and Easter eggs, these little quests that revealed a hidden layer underneath what you thought your game was. In effect, classic Zombie strength was that it was a very replayable, challenging survival experience with a unique set of obstacles and challenges and hazards in each map. New Zombies, I would argue, is not really a survival game anymore based on resource management and point management. It's more of an action FPS RPG in which the goal is now to power climb as quickly and effectively as possible to take on the various boss fights and challenges that the maps present. Sure, the survival is there too, but it's more as a function of the round-based design and nothing more. In a weird way, New Zombies is almost an inverse of the original. A survival mode with quests on the side now is primarily a quest mode with survival on the side. Like, for God's sake, there's even a directed mode specifically made for people to complete the Easter egg quests easier. This is a not so subtle shift in direction for the game mode that, yes, may feel more palatable to lots of players, but is missing that original charm it once had. New Zombies, even though you technically need to survive, the gameplay systems aren't really built to make that a challenge anymore. For example, ammo boxes can be found in just about every single room on every map. What used to be an extremely precious resource that was rarely refilled by the occasional and random max ammo drop, the change to the point system means that trying to maximize points in the early game to use resources for other things just isn't as important anymore, and there's no small minigame for how you optimize killing zombies. Shooting them a couple of times in the leg and knifing them doesn't really do anything for you anymore. There is now no perk limit, and that means you no longer have to make sacrifices for which perk you want. Instead, you accumulate enough points to get all of them as quickly as possible. There are plenty of other minor mechanics that lend themselves to being more oriented towards RPG adventure. All of the other little things that are less about survival, stuff like zombie health bars and damage numbers, the mini-map, and things like that, but none are as obvious as the health and armor system. When Black Ops 4 removed Juggernog as a perk, it was an attempt at getting rid of crutch perks, stuff that you buy every single game without fail, which isn't a bad thing in theory, but Black Ops 4 ended up creating its own set of crutch perks without mediating the original problem very much. The basic crutch perks got worked into other systems. Juggernog effectively just was your base health, Speed Cola kicked in once you had all 4 perks active, Double Tap's damage bonus would apply when you quadruple Pack-a-Punched a weapon, and Quick Revive was a fixed set of revives that were built into your character from the very start of the match. This system had its own problems for sure, but Cold War and thus new zombies would try to tackle this issue in a different way. See, something that made classic zombies interesting were its limits. It could be a perk limit, a wonder weapon limit, or a map feature limit. This forced the player to be strategic about how they use certain things. On Origins, for example, you have a 4 perk limit, but through a clever side Easter egg, you can risk it to get empty bottles that will give you more perk slots, surpassing that limit. New Zombies gives you the ability to buy all of your perks without limit, with the caveat, however, that each subsequent perk bought would increase in price. This is a good compromise, I think, because it still requires you to judge which perks are most important first and prioritize those, but the downside is that it makes Easter eggs to get free perks basically pointless, among many other issues. Now, chronically online Reddit users will be like, they can just give us classic zombies by removing the weapon rarities, armor, and giving us a perk limit, but that's not really how it would work at all. And this is something I want you to keep in the back of your mind this whole video. A classic zombies mode for Black Ops 6 is not just about removing armor and leaving everything else pretty much and calling it a day. The big difference between classic zombies and new zombies is that the former was really about damage avoidance and survival, and new zombies is about damage mitigation. Getting hit in old zombies was extremely lethal, but the zombies were on average much slower and less aggressive. New zombies has extremely fast-paced and aggressive zombies, but the way that the health and armor system works means that you can take a couple of hits, and as long as you're mitigating the damage you take, you don't really have too much to worry about. I mean, you have augments for lessening the damage you take when receiving an armored hit. This would never be a feature in classic zombies. Now, people have argued that a zombie shield should take place of armor, and there's debate about which of the two is better. And guess what? They actually made that a feature in Black Ops 6, but pretty much no one uses it because modern zombies gameplay makes that kind of defense that is backside only rather useless. This may be the most glaring issue facing the new zombies discussion, that being armor and its place in the overall game. But that is nested inside the question of, should the gameplay be about damage avoidance or damage mitigation? And that argument is nested inside a larger discussion of, what is zombies, a survival resource management style game or an FPS adventure RPG game? And at this point, it's way too late to expect a massive course correct in that way, but at least I would make the argument that the mechanic of armor could go a long way feeling better if there were just a couple of cosmetic changes or even just more contextual things to zombies, perhaps even map specific. Like, for example, on Citadelle Des Morts, if it had chain link armor and a different animation, or you have like this etheric energy barrier that is contextual to the map you're playing, just something to make it feel a little bit more zombies, and instead of the tiresome out of the way iron plate. But besides that, another key modern zombie system that we've seen are weapon rarities. These are a color tiered system that, unless you legit haven't played a modern video game in the last 5 years, so many games utilize this system. Each rarity is a different tier of damage that scales from default gray all the way up to an orange legendary, and that being the strongest of the normal weapons, with wonder weapons having their own unique rarity given to them. Of course, this means that the same weapon of a different rarity can do wildly different damage than the same gun of a lower rarity. This was a core system introduced in the very first game of the new zombies formulation, and it has not been a staple since. Of course, you still have the Pack-a-Punch for upgrading your gun, but instead of a one and done like in classic zombies, or 4 and done if you're playing BO4, here you have 3 different tiers of Pack-a-Punch, a very simple tiered system that drastically increases your damage output for increasingly higher costs. This and weapon rarities are, once again, a system that makes sense to most players. But diehard enjoyers of the classic Coke formula are going to be opposed to liking or accepting this. However, one major difference to the Coke analogy I've been comparing to this entire video is that classic zombies, in terms of like between each and every individual map, were entirely different experiences. No, they could be entirely different games if you wanted them to be. Even just on Black Ops 2, Mob of the Dead plays nothing like Transit does, despite them being on the same game and using a lot of these same base mechanics. This offered a wide moat of potential experience that maybe spoke to some players but not others. Each classic zombies map strived to be unique mechanically and visually. Mostly. However, since the start of the new Zombies era, they have deeply homogenized the gameplay and maps, which, don't get me wrong, can be a good thing, especially if that formula is good, because despite the reverence for a lot of the classics, not all of those maps are good or even fun, but they're all truly very different. Have you ever noticed that we don't really get truly standout maps anymore? I mean, very rarely now. All modern Zombies maps are consistently pretty good, at least, with a few here and there being a little more skewed in a positive or negative direction, but the overall trend is a very solid but stable direction. Nothing now is ever really polarizing in a good or bad way anymore. That's because classic zombies made systems to fit maps, and new zombies makes maps to fit their systems. Remember when only perks or guns were on specific maps, the PPSH returning on Gorod Krovi on Black Ops 3?
What was that in the box? The PPSH is back! Yes!
That literally hadn't been in the game since World at War, but more importantly, made sense contextually with that theme and setting of the map. Or in Shangri-La, for instance, when instead of having regular old claymores, they were, for no reason, creatively remade into spike mores specifically for that experience. Or in Call of the Dead, you have this boss enemy, George Romero, that only appears here and that follows you around constantly. You can't find a boss zombie that behaves like him anywhere else in COD Zombies. In new zombies, we have the same perks, the same weapons, the same field upgrades, the same crafting table, and equipment on every single map, meaning that the major differences map to map are up to their aesthetic, layout, and main quest, and even wonder weapon. And I mean, even think about Pack-a-Punch Quest 2. While I'm not necessarily arguing for a BO4 style collectathon to get Pack-a-Punch, I would advocate for at least having different kinds of problems to solve to get to Pack-a-Punch. On Derice, it's a very intuitive yet simple linking of the teleporters. You have a timer which intuitively demands you go back to the beginning, in which Pack-a-Punch is literally right in your face from the very start. Problem and solution. Or in Mob of the Dead, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's an entirely different problem to deal with. You have to gather all of the plane parts and get all of those things to build and then fly to the Golden Gate Bridge. All of the Cold War, Vanguard, BO6 maps are basically objective markers to take you right to the Pack-a-Punch machine, more or less with the same solution to access it. You buy the door until you get to the thing, and then you maybe shoot a couple of items and that's it. I mean, otherwise, it's the same toys in a different sandbox. And this might be fine if the other more hidden things gave you unique rewards, but they pretty much don't. As an example, take the Hell's Retriever on Mob of the Dead. That is a quest that you need to undertake that no matter what you do or how long you play in that map, you cannot and will not get the Retriever unless doing that specific quest, or free perk Easter eggs that are useful and that you actually want to do them because you have a perk limit. In Black Ops 6 Zombies, I love the side quests from a design standpoint. They're so much fun, and they have, markedly improved in depth and quality compared to Cold War Zombie side quests. They're so good here. There's some really neat ideas and quests that are incredibly creative. However, the major problem with these is that most side quests in the game grant you either a free perk or an aether tool to upgrade your gun's rarity, essence, or salvage, which all of these things that I mentioned you will already get if you play the game long enough. You play the game long enough and shoot enough zombies, you'll eventually have enough essence to buy all of the perks, so that getting a free perk doesn't really mean anything without a perk limit, or even similarly a free aether tool is only really helpful until you have enough salvage for the next tier. My point is, side quests in New Zombies have struggled to add any meaningful incentive to do them, despite the quality of the actual quests going way up. There are a few exceptions though, and this is what I want to see Treyarch do more of going forward. The Tomb has a really cool Easter egg that involves you getting golden armor, which is essentially an infinitely regenerating armor plate, ironically behaving like Juggernog. This, no matter how long you play or all of the materials that you collect, salvage, essence, and whatnot, you cannot simply buy your way to golden armor, or the Aether Blade on the Reckoning, which that has its own controversy as well, which we'll touch on later, but my point is that it's a unique mechanic or an item that you're not simply going to get along the way just by playing enough. I would really like to see more of that stuff instead of the 100th free perk or essence or Aether Tool side Easter egg that kind of becomes irrelevant past like round 15 or 20. Not saying that they need to get rid of those entirely, but there's a shocking lack of unique and interesting rewards to go after throughout the match of your game. On the topic of RPG FPS mechanics that New Zombies takes, Black Ops 6 iterates on the menu progression idea first introduced in Cold War Zombies, in which you had Ethereum crystals that permanently upgrade your perks and weapons and field upgrades straight in a vertical skill tree. Once you do these, you pretty much never think about them again, and I was never really a big fan of this system at all. Black Ops 6 makes a massive improvement on this original idea. Now you bring in the element of build crafting and sacrifice. The system now gets far more dynamic with augments. Basically, all of your perks have the capacity to apply one major and one minor augment at a time. Augments act as additional selectable bonuses to further bolster or alter the effect of your perk or upgrade in some way. You can actually pick and choose majors and minors for all of these, but only one. So you need to pick the one that works best for you, the situation you're up against, and how you like to play. My stance on the system is that while I'm not really a fan overall of out-of-game progression systems, to be honest, like I don't really care for stuff like this in Ethereum upgrade trees if I had it my way, but I will say that this is a remarkable improvement to the system that they tried in Cold War Zombies and has led to far more interesting gameplay dynamics than a static vertical progression tree ever could. Still though, again, if I had it my way, I always prefer all of the progression to be done in-game, in the match itself if all possible, or just some kind of like minimally impactful out-of-game system, kind of like weapon kits in BO3. They're nice and they're there, but they don't completely change how the game is approached, but they're just nice bonuses to add on to your weapons. Augments though, looking back at them, I think have been an overall success as far as this game is concerned. You do also have the same system that is coming back over from Cold War of weapon loadouts. Obviously, you can choose whatever weapon you bring into the match. You don't start out with a pistol, you can, but you can technically bring in anything and upgrade the rarity as you go throughout your match. They have expanded this to some degree with the attachment system in Black Ops 6. A lot of the attachments in Cold War Zombies were useless or didn't really function in any direct way for zombies, but they've actually had a special fine-tuning adjustment to make sure that mostly all zombie attachments are viable. And once again, just like with the augments, I think the loadout system, insofar as they're planning on keeping it and expanding upon it, has been an overall success in Black Ops 6 as well. Build crafting, as it relates to your augments and your weapon selection and attachments, feels like it has more purpose in BO6 than it ever did in Cold War. Now, despite a lot of my criticisms of the gameplay in Black Ops 6 Zombies, there have been some amazing additions to the game. For example, Gobblegum make a return for the first time since Black Ops 3, and they are solidly integrated here. I don't think they're quite as interesting as they were in Black Ops 3, and that's mostly because the game isn't as sandboxy anymore, and what was fun about Gobblegums was basically trying to break the game, even if you weren't necessarily doing that. A lot of the Gobblegum in Black Ops 6 have the unfortunate effect that these side Easter eggs do, in which they just give you bonuses that you're already going to get anyways, for the most part. Perkaholic, Hidden Power, Raindrops, it's stuff that you're already going to acquire throughout your match. Again, there's a couple exceptions to this, but something like Timeout, which just makes all the zombies despawn, is not nearly as interesting as Killing Time in Black Ops 3 that literally froze everything everything in place in the map. You could do so many crazy, broken, and fun things with that. It's just that the Gobblegum are a little bit more ironed out than they were in BO3, and I understand why that is. They've gotten so good at making games from a technical perspective that you can't really break the game with Gobblegum like you used to back in the day. However, they do have a feature that I absolutely love, and in regards to the weapons, it's actually a direct criticism I had about Cold War, which is that upgrading weapons doesn't really feel special because they don't really do anything unique. I always loved how in Black Ops 1, you pack a punch a weapon like the crossbow, it actually starts attracting zombies, or the ballistic knife pack-a-punch would revive teammates. You get these very special bonuses, and they actually made that happen in Black Ops 6. Pretty much all of the guns have some kind of unique firing effect. Either its fire rate is rapidly increased, or something like the SVD becomes a shotgun sniper hybrid, and this stuff is amazing. All of the pack-a-punched weapons are more interesting because there is some kind of bonus associated with it that is unique to that weapon, and it's a nice touch. But besides that, all of the really interesting content is to be found within the individual maps themselves, and we're going to take a look and analyze all of them. But before we do that, I want to quickly take a detour and talk a little bit about the story. Now, I'm not going to have a huge segment on this because that isn't the primary reason I made this video, but it must be discussed because the Dark Aether story is an absolute disaster. I mean, where do I even begin, honestly? The Dark Aether story's problems begin at the end of Black Ops 4, in which that was kind of supposed to be the end of the Aether, and honestly, maybe even the end of zombies, but of course, they couldn't do that for Cold War, and zombies is coming back, albeit in the Dark Aether, which is a different universe that Sam and Eddie walked into at the end of Togder Toten.
After so many journeys, so many chapters, with Black Ops Cold War, we're starting fresh, embarking on a completely different story within our universe.
However, the problem with the Dark Aether big picture is that for some reason they felt the need to canonize the zombie story into the greater like Call of Duty universe. So this literally means that all of the outbreaks anywhere they've taken place have been contained and nothing ever goes in its own direction because you ultimately know where it's going to end up. Soap literally appears in Modern Warfare Zombies and we know what happens to him at the end of MW3. And there doesn't seem to be any ripple effects from zombies throughout their worlds, but it means they're also trying to like retroactively fit the zombie storyline into previous Call of Duties. Think about how ridiculous this is. There's a piece of intel that suggests that Raul Menendez, when he was in this compound, remember this mission here, there was an outbreak of zombies at this compound that just happened and then it was gone and then no one ever talked about it again and it didn't have any effect in the world. It's like, huh? Now, here's the thing, though. Despite the ending of Togder Toten essentially being nullified at the existence of Cold War zombies, right? Nikolai's sacrifice with Samantha and Eddie doesn't really mean anything if they just went to a universe where all of this zombie stuff is happening once again. But that aside, I was willing to give it a chance, and admittedly, Cold War's story started out pretty slow, but it had some interesting ideas going for it, and obviously, the end of that game reveals Edward Richtofen, who has been running Project Janus this whole time. And I expected and thought that we were going to hit the ground running, figuring out what Richtofen was doing and what he was up to in Black Ops 6. It's only at the end of Black Ops 6 that we actually really get anything solid about what Richtofen was up to or the conclusion to that arc. Almost all of the Black Ops 6 Zombies maps take place in this Appalachian area, and every single map is going to a place to get a thing that will lead you to another thing, and they don't even understand what they do. When we get to Shattered Veil, we start seeing that, you know, they tied the Chaos storyline in, which I'm pretty sure was a complete mistake, by the way, but they, you know, tied this in without understanding what any of these things are really for. They talk about Prima Materia, the Sentinel artifacts, and so on, not understanding what their purpose was. Why do the disciples have the High Priest of Chaos robes? Don't ask Treyarch because they literally don't know. I think the problem is that Craig Houston had to take a break for personal reasons for writing for the Dark Aether storyline. I think he wrote most of Cold War, but around like Vanguard and BO6, I think he was out for most of it. So obviously we have other writers taking over, and the thing is, I just don't feel like they personally understand what makes zombies what it is, or they don't understand the heritage of it. Telling the COD zombie storyline like it's a Marvel film just does not work. Zombies and Call of Duty isn't Marvel, but they treat it like such, and it just is very off-putting. Not to mention all of the unfortunate circumstances of Julie Nathanson, the voice of Samantha Maxis, who has been voicing her from the very beginning of COD Zombies, quit due to the SAG-AFTRA strikes, as well as most of the cast for BO6. So this means that in virtually every single cutscene, all of our new characters to the Dark Aether universe have literally nothing to say, and it's horrifically painful. I know this is not the direction that Craig Houston wants to take the story. I think that it's being pulled in many directions with the writers, but the other problem is that the people that are designing the gameplay, I don't think necessarily are communicating with the people that are making the story. There has never been more disconnect between gameplay and story in any COD Zombies title to date. And look, I could sit here and go over every single painful detail about what is wrong with the Dark Aether story, from its concept to its details, to them carelessly shoehorning in the Chaos storyline that was supposed to be entirely separate to the Aether universe at first, but now they don't even understand what made Chaos what it was either. Prima Materia, the Sentinel artifacts, the Order, all of these things had very specific roles of what they did in the Chaos storyline, but the Dark Aether treats these random objects just as generic props that have the power to do whatever the writers want. What is Prima Materia? I don't know, it's just this random crap that brings people back to life. What does the Sentinel artifact do? Well, specifically, this is the Odin artifact. I don't know, it brings back the multiverse or whatever. Who knows? I don't blame Craig Houston at all for this. I know he's not the one in charge of where this direction is currently going, but the problem is it's having extreme effects on the direction of the game for sure. And they can't seem to let the premise crew or the original 4 go. In fact, in Black Ops 7, all 4 of these original cast members are all from different time periods. So even just being around and fighting in the same war, you know, being in the literal same time setting in World War II, yeah, they don't even have the commonality to be from the same time period anymore. Like, I don't know what they're doing here, but here's an idea. Instead of bringing back the original 4, why don't you bring back characters that are literally in the Dark Aether as we speak, and that have all of their voice actors hypothetically able to voice their roles? This would just make much more sense, given that Black Ops 7's launch map is a transit remake. Do you remember at the end of Black Ops 4, when this moment in Togder Toten, you have to be the one to walk into this light. You have to be the one to let them go. That's why they made this level playable.
Is this like playable?
This was a very deliberate choice from Treyarch, because they could have very easily just made this into a cinematic cutscene, which modern COD Zombies tends to do a lot, but they made you, the player, take your controller and let these characters and this story go when you're ready. Oh, but it doesn't really matter because Richtofen's just back.
Oh my god, bruh.
But all of that seems to go down the drain at the ending of Black Ops 6. Depending on which ending you pick, Richtofen, Eddie, who is in this cutscene, is literally dead, and Samantha, who flew into the Forsaken to stop him, also died, allegedly off-screen. I don't know if it's because Julie Nathanson quit, or if it's because she flew into the Forsaken, literally refuses to elaborate, and then dies. Anyways, that is all to say, the Dark Aether story stinks. As much as I really love Black Ops 6 Zombies gameplay, generally speaking, I think it is the best modern addition to the new COD Zombies formula. I like Black Ops 6 far more than Cold War, Vanguard, and Modern Warfare Zombies combined, so if I'm just looking at this new era, Black Ops 6 is easily the winner when it comes to content and gameplay and even maps. But the story is being written in a way that I feel like Raven writes recent Black Ops campaigns, where they don't really get Black Ops. I don't think the current writers of the zombie storyline, not including Craig Houston, I don't think they really get COD Zombies and its heritage and its storyline that much. But if I'm looking at BO6 purely from the lens of its gameplay and its map design, that's what I want to dig into, because BO6 has some excellent maps. They've also really stepped it up when it comes to boss fights, but we'll talk about each and every one individually, and we'll go in order. Did you know that Liberty Falls is literally the most played zombies map in all of COD Zombies history? And if that sounds unbelievable, it's true. In terms of hours played and the amount of people that jumped onto this map, Liberty Falls is by far their most numerically successful COD Zombies map ever. But you might be wondering why that is, especially if you've played Liberty Falls, because this is the map on disc, and even before the game released, the initial reaction to this was not so good. It was because Liberty Balls, it was this map has no aura. What is really going on here? It doesn't feel like a zombies map, and it got quite a lot of criticism before release. However, how did it go from that to becoming the most played zombies map in history? Well, the answer to me is pretty simple. Well, this is the easiest map to play on disc on Black Ops 6. Everybody has access to this map, and it is the most casual map in the game, even compared to Terminus, which isn't that much more complex, granted, but it is still easier to set up on Liberty Falls and get going, and mostly everybody played this map for the camo grind, or it's just the easiest map to jump on and shoot zombies and unlock content. That being said, I don't think that Treyarch should look at Liberty Falls and be like, we need to make every map Liberty Falls because it was the most played map ever. It's important to understand the reason people played this, because not that there's anything inherently wrong with Liberty Falls, but it's not a spectacular map. It's fine. It's literally the most simple map in the game that is simply to get you into the tone and vibe of what Black Ops 6 is going for, but the more deep and sophisticated experiences are to be found beyond Liberty Falls. But I don't think the reasoning why this was the most played zombies map ever really goes any farther than this is just simply the most efficient map to camo grind. And again, that has its place in the game. I always compare it to having a similar dynamic to the Giant and Shadows of Evil in Black Ops 3. Admittedly, the gap between the Giant and Shadows and Liberty Falls and Terminus is much less, I think, but still, I think that's what they were going for. Liberty Falls is a perfectly serviceable map. It has a very simple layout. There's actually no quest involved to get to Pack-a-Punch, not even something as simple as linking teleporters. It's just you buy the doors, you walk up to the church, and Pack-a-Punch is there. And despite the reveal of the Pack-a-Punch inside the Dark Aether Church being a really neat visual, I think most people's problems with Liberty Falls as a map is not necessarily its layout, and it may not even be its lack of Pack-a-Punch quest, but it's the lack of atmosphere that Liberty Falls brings. There are maps in COD Zombies that were utterly terrifying. Stuff like Verrucht or even Kino der Toten had an unsettling aura that might be a term that gets overused quite a lot, but in this case, I do think it's apt to say that Liberty Falls really doesn't have much going on in the way of an atmosphere that draws you in. It is worth noting that despite many of the bonus zombies maps we've gotten in Treyarch's past, stuff like Nuketown Zombies or even the Giant, these don't typically have main storyline Easter eggs associated with them, and no, the flytrap on the Giant doesn't count. I would almost equate that to a side Easter egg in today's standards, but Liberty Falls actually does have its own main quest, and that is further backed up by the fact that they have a directed mode for Liberty Falls. But the main quest is well designed yet very simple and easy to complete, and it involves you essentially like gathering these parts, building the jet gun, eventually serving Dr. Panos, and then killing zombies in the church near the end. There's no traditional boss fight, but you do have a finale sequence against a couple of HVTs, which is a neat addition. This Easter egg quest design I think is solid for Black Ops 6 because it's certainly not too overwhelming for most new players, and Terminus and literally every subsequent map after would have a more complicated main quest line, so I think it's okay to have a more simplified one here. But the thing is, there's not really that much to dig into with Liberty Falls because outside of the main Easter egg and a couple of really neat side quests with Aetherella, but honestly, other than that, in terms of gameplay stuff, there really isn't that much else to dig into with Liberty Falls. It's really down to the wonder weapon. You do get the jet gun returning from Black Ops 2. It is significantly more powerful in Liberty Falls, and it doesn't break this time. So you have unlimited ammo. I think it's easily one of the best wonder weapons in the game, and perhaps one of the best wonder weapons in COD Zombies, period. And you might be sitting here thinking, okay, if the map is so simple and not really a whole lot going on, why is it the most popular map in COD Zombies history, speaking from a metrics perspective? And again, I think it's all down to the fact that it's simply the most efficient way to grind content in Black Ops 6. People aren't inherently playing it for the love of the game or the love of the map. And when you're directly comparing it to the rest of the offering that's still in Black Ops 6, Liberty Falls is the weakest map in terms of content and offering, yet it's still the most popular. That's just because it's efficient to play, and it's not for the love of the map. And don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against Liberty Falls, and I also don't think that Treyarch should never make a map like this because it does serve its place in the game. We've had maps in years past that kind of go for a similar vibe. You always have your smaller casual map, and and then your slightly more complicated ones, and that would become even more clear as zombies would go on. So it has its place in the game, but again, my point is I don't want them to look at that and those numbers and go, okay, every map from here on out needs to be Liberty Falls, because that's not really what everybody's looking for. The other map that released alongside Liberty Falls on launch for Black Ops 6 Zombies was Terminus, and to be honest with you, this is one of my favorite maps in the game. I really think that Terminus is a great showcase for how good Black Ops 6 can be, and it certainly brings out the best in these new gameplay systems. Terminus is this prison on an island where at the end of Cold War our characters were arrested and sent to and have been for many years, and now in their breakout attempt they're attempting to find Richthofen. Compared to Liberty Falls, Terminus already has a much more complex setup in terms of accessing Pack-a-Punch. You have to work your way from the starting room all the way down into the lower laboratories, turning on the power at each individual module. Once you do that, you raise the lift and the Pack-a-Punch machine is available. By no means is it the most complicated or in-depth Pack-a-Punch quest we've ever seen in the mode. However, it's complicated enough to feel like you're doing something, and not to mention the modules take you to all the key areas, giving you a good feel of the map and forcing you to learn the layout a little bit, because Terminus is a much bigger map than Liberty Falls. However, a lot of that space is actually open water outside of the main island itself. Most round-based maps are some kind of compact space, but Terminus did something really interesting that I was initially skeptical about, but honestly, I think it kind of works. All of the surrounding in the island is this open body of water with a couple of tiny islands surrounding it and a boat as well. You might think that a round-based zombies map with an open body of water that you can traverse on a boat at any time wouldn't really make sense or would totally ruin the pace of gameplay, but it absolutely doesn't, because there are other hazards in the water that will become a threat other than the zombies themselves, and if you spend too much time in there, you might see this tentacle monster start to chase you. I love this creature from a design perspective. I think my only disappointment is that really it is severely underutilized. You can't really kill this thing. There's no side Easter eggs associated with using this tentacle. It's simply a mechanic to keep you out of the water for a long period of time, but the individual islands surrounding the main one all have their own little purpose, whether it's a side Easter egg, an Easter egg to teleport back to the main area, or a piece for the wonder weapon. There's actually a decent amount of verticality in Terminus as well, but you don't really notice it, and I think that's a good thing. You have this sort of layer one, the upper floor, where you spawn in and that kind of section. Then you have this open courtyard where a lot of people like to train. This is essentially the ground floor, and then you have the lower floor where the laboratories are. And this kind of verticality can make traversal really annoying or confusing, but in Terminus, it's actually quite intuitive, because you have the lift that constantly goes up and down between floors every couple of rounds, or you have an elevator in the labs that can quickly take you between floors as well. Between all of this traversal options and the boat that can take you to the surrounding islands, Terminus has a surprisingly good map flow for a map this big, with most of the square footage just being open water. I was pleasantly surprised about how well this actually plays, and it does add a atmosphere and a tone to this map. In some ways, it's a island that feels quite lonely, and that sort of tone is absolutely conveyed in this map, where if you weren't really feeling the atmosphere in Liberty Falls, Terminus is a extremely immersive map in that way for sure. And speaking of which, the main quest takes that a step farther. In terms of main quest or Easter egg design, everybody prefers something a little different. There are people that prefer extremely complicated puzzles. There are other people that prefer, the item that you need to be so extraordinarily hidden, it's like the rocks on Revelations that nobody's ever going to find. There are other people that prefer intuitive gameplay sequences that can be challenging and require some skill but are easy to repeat. I think I draw a little bit from each and every category, and that's why Terminus is one of my favorite main quests in Black Ops 6, but more so maybe one of the best quests in general. Terminus is literally the perfect blend of gameplay sequences and puzzles and items to collect. Starting the main quest is fairly simple. It's pretty much opening up Pack-a-Punch, and then you use Dead Wire to open up a secret room. From here, you can actually use those puzzle-solving skills to actually work out a real math equation to get yourself numbers that will essentially assist you in the Wonder Weapon quest. However, if you don't want to do the math, they actually give you an option to pay money to just get the solution yourself. Meaning these puzzles are there if you want to use your brain muscles a little bit, but it doesn't force you if you don't want to. And then after completing your puzzle step, you go around the map, a little bit of a collective fawn for the Wonder Weapon pieces, you put it together, and then you do a small little puzzle to get 3 numbers around the map. Again, nothing too complicated, but you're rewarded for doing all these puzzles and collecting these items with a really cool gameplay sequence that's basically a mid-Easter egg boss fight in which you fight Nathan, Maya's brother. And for completing that and defeating him, you're awarded with a mid-game cutscene to set up the rest of the story. From here, the steps get a little bit more complicated, and you have some more intense gameplay sequences in which you have to essentially defuse these buoys and then defuse these bombs. At least in my opinion, Terminus is the textbook Easter egg quest design, and in a lot of ways, to me, it reflects the design philosophy of the Der Eisendrache Easter egg, where it is a perfect balance of gameplay, puzzles, and collecting items. It doesn't lean too heavily too far into one of those categories, meaning that it might be off-putting for some. It is the perfect blend of all 3 of those things. But to top it all off, if that stuff wasn't good enough, at the end of doing all of that work, you are rewarded with an amazing boss fight against Patient 13. This is why I said so much that Treyarch has significantly improved in their boss fight design, because as opposed to the really deflating, kind of anticlimactic final sequence in D Machine, or the pathetic, embarrassing Orta boss fight in Firebase Z, this is a proper boss. He's got his own attack patterns and moves and sequences that you need to learn and figure out how to deal with. Now, essentially, he does have these weak points in which you can use elemental damage to exploit them, but also he just takes cumulative damage over time. But he has phase 2s and even phase 3s. Every time he switches into a different elemental phase, he has a corresponding different elemental weakness as well, meaning that if you coordinate properly with your team, you can always be exploiting his vulnerabilities, which is required because some of his moves are very devastating, and he does have a wipe attack in which he can just literally eliminate anybody on the board. Patient 13, just like the Easter egg quest design, is absolutely fantastic, and it's such a good way to set the tone for what the rest of Black Ops 6 is going for. If Liberty Falls didn't have a boss fight, Terminus makes up for the both of them. Now, I have almost nothing but overwhelming praise for Terminus. I think it's a fantastic map and perhaps one of the best on Black Ops 6. That doesn't mean I don't have a few criticisms. I do think that because the map is so big, they were not properly able to utilize all of the space. I mean, this entire ship, for example, it does have technically a main quest step. You need it for the Wonder Weapon, basically, or for the main Easter egg, but otherwise, other than housing the Wonder Fizz machine, there's really no reason to ever visit this boat. It just feels a little bit empty. Or, for example, this main big generator in the center of the facility, everyone expected or thought there was going to be something associated with it, maybe an Easter egg, a small quest, whatever. This doesn't really do anything as far as we can tell. It's just there as a set piece, I guess, but it's a little underwhelming in that regard. There's a few areas of the map that I don't think get properly utilized. A couple of these caves, there's not much reason to visit, but otherwise, Terminus has a few key playable areas that everybody is going to be aggregating in. People mostly play in either this main courtyard, the spawn room, maybe Crab Island, and that's really about it, or maybe even down in the labs. But outside of those areas, there is a lot of wasted and dead space on Terminus, which isn't really their fault. I mean, it's kind of to be expected given how big this map is, but I just think a lot of the space is significantly underutilized, where in older Zombies maps, or you take Mob of the Dead, for example, they wanted to make that map a lot bigger, but, you know, the technical limitations of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 at the time didn't really allow that, meaning they had to cut all of the dead areas and fat off the map, which I think Terminus could maybe use a little bit of slimming down. I always personally prefer a smaller, tighter, more concentrated map as opposed to a technically bigger but more spread out and bloated Zombies map that doesn't have the content to fill that space that it takes up. Otherwise, Terminus is an excellent map and perhaps one of, if not the best on Black Ops 6. And after Terminus, we would get DLC 1, which would continue that trend. Citadelle Des Morts is probably my contender for best map in the game, and that is for a lot of reasons. This map is certainly a different tone than Terminus. This map actually is based off a real castle in France, and the lore in this map essentially is that there was a man named the Owl, and he had 4 bastard knight sons. During the main quest, we acquire and upgrade all 4 of the elemental swords that belonged to these knights, and obviously they use the tried and true formula of the 4 wonder weapon quest. It never fails, you know, it's obviously goes back to the days of Origins, Der Eisendrache. We've seen the 4 wonder weapon formula used in so many maps, and I'm okay with it every now and again because it does work. Fundamentally, all of these swords are very different and they're all fun to upgrade. They aren't too difficult to upgrade. It's not even quite as complicated as doing the bows on Der Eisendrache, and it's certainly not nearly as involved as building and upgrading a staff on Origins, but the quests are neat, they're unique, and I like doing them a lot. However, I do feel there was a big missed opportunity here. You have to upgrade all 4 of the swords in order to do the main quest. That's to be expected, but I feel like they should have went further with it and given them an additional second upgrade to do that is completely optional. In the map Ancient Evil on Black Ops 4, you upgrade the Hands of the Gods, and once you have these gauntlets, you can actually do the Exalted Hand quest, which is completely optional and honestly doesn't even upgrade it that much more, but you can do this optional other quest to take your wonder weapon even further. But you don't have to, and it doesn't impede your quest progression if you choose not to do the Exalted Hands. I just think that there should have been a second upgrade to these swords because while they are fun and they're good, they're not quite as powerful maybe as that I was expecting, or I just think they could have been taken a step further. However, the map itself, the layout is fairly straightforward with essentially 2 layers in the upper floor of the castle and the lower chamber down below. And the main quest, just like Terminus, has a very good blend of puzzles and gameplay steps, which are all interwoven into the actual sequence of the gameplay that allows you to naturally progress through the rounds as you upgrade all of the swords and get near the end. I really like this quest design philosophy. There needs to be an integration of the actual killing of zombies and survival gameplay with the steps of the main Easter egg, in my opinion. One of the things I didn't really care for in some of the Easter eggs of the past, particularly in Black Ops 4, was that those puzzles demanded so much of your action and attention that the zombies felt like an afterthought. They were almost like a nuisance to you trying to do these puzzles that demanded 100% of your action. So you don't really have time to kill zombies. It just felt like the zombies didn't even need to be there and it wouldn't make that much of a difference. They were not integrated well with the actual gameplay of those steps, but Modern Zombies has done a lot to make that happen. While it's not perfect, I think it's a step in the right direction. Once all 4 elemental swords have been acquired and upgraded, you now have the ability to face off against the boss, which is the Guardian. This is actually the statue that appears before you in the center courtyard right when you spawn into the game. They always do this neat foreshadowing where they show maybe the remnants or basically a vague description of what the boss might be at the end of it, and it's something that Black Ops 6 has leaned into, which I think is pretty cool. But the Guardian itself, in my opinion, is a mechanical masterpiece. This is an amazing boss that is extremely lethal, and what's even more fun and interesting is that the swords that you bring into the fight are actually useful because they have a parry mechanic which actually allows you to parry the Guardian's moves. As someone who plays a lot of stuff like Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro, parrying a boss is right up my alley, and this really works for me. And in the context of making this work in a first-person shooter game, this has been amazingly executed. The Guardian might be my favorite boss other than Patient 13. The bosses have gotten significantly more complex, with the Guardian actually having different armor plates that cover sections of his body that you first need to remove in order to deal real damage. You can charge up your sword to fend off the zombies, which will in turn give you more ability to charge and use that against the Guardian himself. In terms of side quests and Easter eggs, there are a few things that are at least interesting enough to do one time, but on this map specifically, I think the rewards from the side Easter eggs are honestly one of the weakest in Black Ops 6. There are no really unique mechanics that you can only get by doing that quest. There's no golden armor or an ether blade or anything like that, meaning most of the rewards for these are simply perks or an ether tool, which again, if you play play long enough isn't really that useful to you. And as much as I really like Citadelle Des Morts, I think it's one of the strongest maps in Black Ops 6 Zombies, I have to admit that I'm a little bit disappointed with the art direction of this map. Obviously, with 4 wonder weapons and it being set in a castle, immediately there's going to be comparisons to Der Eisendrache in Black Ops 3, and that map is absolutely gorgeous, despite it being a very similar setting. This castle that's sort of been repurposed into a facility, more or less, but still, that managed to have a few areas that are extremely aesthetically pleasing, and Der Eisendrache, no matter where you are in that map, is really nice on the eyes, and I just can't say the same for Citadel. It's mostly just the brown mundane of the castle, even though they tried to integrate these more magical elements into the storyline and the map itself. I don't think it quite goes far enough. I think that there aren't any areas in the game that feel, you know, beautiful to look at to me. It's a fine map, but the art direction is not quite up to snuff. And when playing this map, it was always just kind of lingering there for me, and I didn't know if anybody else felt the same, but I would say this map is nice to look at and it's fine, but I wouldn't exactly call it beautiful in the way that I would call Der Eisendrache beautiful. Citadelle Des Morts is an honestly fantastic map that doesn't have very many major flaws to pick at. However, I don't think that it goes far enough in what it could have been. The biggest sin of Citadelle Des Morts is honestly the missed opportunity it left on the table. And after the monstrous expectations we had coming off of the high of Terminus and Citadelle Des Morts, the expectations for the tomb were set pretty high. And I noticed something kind of odd when making this video. When I sit down and think about it, the tomb is basically the same map as Liberty Falls. There's very little difference between those two things. The only difference, other than its obvious aesthetic choice and its layout, is actually its Easter egg and the wonder weapon. I mean, that's pretty much it. Otherwise, mechanically and how you really interact with the map and a lot of the enemies and stuff, it's kind of the same thing. The tomb is a very small, more compact map with its own main Easter egg as well that honestly doesn't vary too differently to how difficult or how many steps Liberty Falls has, and in fact, it even ends sort of the same way, where it's not an actual boss fight per se, you fight against the Sentinel artifact. I mean, hell, both of the maps pull from Black Ops 2 for their wonder weapon. The tomb features the ice staff from Origins, and don't even get me started on the Origins callbacks because I think they are extremely out of place in this map. As you approach the Nexus and you get to the Pack-a-Punch machine, you start hearing the music from the Origins mound playing, and to get the ice staff, which really doesn't have any reason for being here, our character cast, including the person Archibald that like guides us through the map, nobody has any reason to know what this is, yet it's treated like a keys jangling in front of you because it's a thing you know from Zombies. I like the tomb on its own, minus the Origins callbacks that feel really cheap and out of place. I know the tomb is one of the least liked maps to the community, and I definitely understand why. It's not my favorite either, and it's on the lower end of Black Ops 6's offering for sure, but that doesn't mean it's a bad map, because how can it be? It's fine. It uses the exact same mechanics as all of the other Black Ops 6 maps. It doesn't take any big swings or do really anything crazy, minus maybe its boss fight, but even then, that's still manageable. I think the coolest thing about the tomb, however, is the golden armor plate side Easter egg. This is actually the only one really worth doing and that you should go for every single game, and it's pretty cool. You have to find these two different statue heads and then place them back in on their respective statue bodies in the spawn room. When you do that, the entire room gets enclosed, you cannot use kill streaks or anything, and you have to take down these extremely aggressive and powerful HVTs, doppelgasts, and mimics, and if you do this successfully and survive, you'll be given golden armor, but that is a challenge that is certainly worth trying because your health gets basically taken down to 1 and you have to play almost perfectly. I don't think there's any real reason to hate the tomb, especially if you don't hate Liberty Falls, because they are the exact same map with a different coat of paint and a different wonder weapon. But when you look under the hood, these maps are more similar than they are different, and I get it, it's a formula now. I would even say that Terminus and something like Citadelle Des Morts have a very similar formula to each other. Obviously, the aesthetics, once again, are different, but the actual underlying mechanics are kind of the same. The tomb, however, was certainly the low point for the Zombies community at the time, and I will say for myself, my only real major criticism is that while I definitely prefer this aesthetic to the Liberty Falls aesthetic for sure, However, it doesn't quite reach the same strengths and heights that Ancient Evil did in Black Ops 4. It's a very similar premise where you have this city sort of underneath the earth, and I just don't think they quite match the art that map was able to pull off specifically. But otherwise, it's a completely serviceable, albeit maybe slightly disappointing map depending on what you were anticipating to come out. But the map after that would take some big swings and would do a few things differently. Shattered Vale is where Black Ops 6 starts to get interesting because I do think they start changing their philosophy of design a little bit, particularly with the main quests and even its wonder weapons. Now, Shattered Vale is a much bigger map than I think anybody was expecting. We knew that we were going to be playing in Richtofen's mansion to some capacity. That was known from the start, but you know, you would be led to believe that it would pretty much just be the mansion, but it's not. You have the outer courtyard in the spawn room, you have the greenhouse, you have the mansion itself, which, by the way, is designed in a way that I felt like Gorod Krovi was, especially in its interiors that are meant to be a little bit confusing. The layout, I believe, is intentionally disorienting for a lot of reasons, and it requires you to play a couple of times to really navigate the layout and to get that down. However, it's not just the mansion. You can actually go down the elevator shaft to where Samantha, or at least the Sam AI, is hanging out at, and you have this whole underground facility as well. But if that was enough, with all of the areas that you think you've discovered, there's another hidden one where if you get an ether bomb out of one of these Janus crates, you can place it on this debris and you get access to this cave that you did not expect to be there that has a statue of the Greylorm from Modern Warfare Zombies. What I really liked about Shattered Vale is that it definitely surpassed my expectations in terms of how much of the map there was going to be, and finding that secret cave for the first time genuinely feels magical. And you have to utilize all of these spaces in the map to do the map's Easter egg because it is fairly complex, and I think they really take a page out of Black Ops 4's book here. They don't go too overboard with it, but you need to collect a lot of parts in this map, and there are a ton of spawn locations for each and every single thing. Shattered Vale really leans into the design philosophy of the collectathon style of quest, and while there are gameplay sequences and there are a couple of puzzles, it's largely about collecting the items that you need to upgrade the Ray Gun Mark IIs, which are technically elemental, but it's a little more complicated than that, and they all have their own individual quest. Speaking of which, there are even more secrets to unlock when you're doing the Ray Gun quest. You can actually go behind the portraits of these Chaos robe wearing fellas. Again, I don't even know why they have these High Priest robes on. Don't ask Treyarch either, because they don't know. But anyways, you finish a little gameplay sequence in all of these portraits, and then you get your ray guns upgraded. And the finale of Shattered Vale is also fantastic. Just like how the Guardian was teased in Citadelle Des Morts with the opening and you see the statue in spawn, in Shattered Vale, when you first approach and enter the mansion, you see this giant fossilized T-Rex hung up in the middle of the room, and that leads you to believe that what you're going to be fighting is something similar, and you would not be wrong. The Z-Rex comes out, and this fight, just like Citadel, is fantastic. He requires you to stay on your feet at all times and keep moving because the Z-Rex is extremely aggressive and fast, so you need to be weaving in and out, using the space to your advantage, and eventually he will go into another phase in which he gets even more lethal. Now, something I haven't mentioned until now, a lot of the bosses in Black Ops 6 have round 100 variants. If you go to round 100 and play the boss there, you will get an enhanced version of that boss. Now, while they don't have like a crazy different moveset or anything, they are more lethal and they have a new move here and there that can be a little more challenging. I think this is amazing. This is absolutely the kind of stuff that I want to see more from Treyarch. Things that we can do to enhance the experience, to make it more hardcore, and doing it in a way that nobody really expected. This was an amazing surprise, and I believe the first round 100 boss fight was discovered on Shattered Vale with the Z-Rex. So all in all, Shattered Vale, I think, breathed a little bit more life and hope back into the community for the final map leading up to it. In traditional zombies games, even going as far back as World at War, I've always had the sense that DLC 4 is not only the moment to cap off the game it's associated with, but it's also largely a testing ground for experimental changes that in large part reflect how the next game is going to play. For example, World at War Zombies is very simple and straightforward until you get to Derice, which is such a massive leap in terms of game features and direction. The Pack-a-Punch machine literally really redefined zombies going forward. I think that Der Riese is practically the blueprint of a Black Ops 1 map. You have some kind of map hazard, plus an objective to unlock Pack-a-Punch. Or similarly, Moon, at the end of Black Ops 1, is a map that started to take main Easter eggs more seriously and utilized equipment in a way that set up Black Ops 2 maps and their buildables and the emphasis on their Easter eggs. At the end of Black Ops 2, you have Origins, which is practically the blueprints for Black Ops 3 maps for me, with its quest design features, emphasis on story moments, etc. And at the end of Black Ops 3, you have Revelations, which for a lot of reasons I think plays like a Black Ops 4 zombies map, with some of its more obscure Easter egg steps, plus the ability of all of these like overpowered equipment and weapons and so much more. If you've played these games, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, but this stops with Black Ops 4. Because in many ways, that was the end of an era for COD Zombies, and it would be Cold War that would begin with a fresh start. However, I don't really feel like DLC 4 in any game post Black Ops 4 has done this. They've never really been the testing ground for the next game, and that's because they largely have a Zombies formula now and stick to that, and their maps throughout the season fall in line as they intend. So when the final Zombies map Reckoning dropped for Black Ops 6, I had to keep my expectations in check that I'm not expecting to have my mind blown exactly like how Moon or Origins or Revelations did from a gameplay perspective. It's a fine map, as we'll see, but I don't feel that same experimental spirit that takes a chance one way or another, except one thing. But before we discuss that, the premise of the map that this is in Janus Towers, and it's the final confrontation with Richtofen and Samantha Maxis. Matter of fact, you can see Janus Towers as this map was hinted from the beginning, as it's only mere miles away from Liberty Falls. Reckoning as a map aims to play with much more verticality in its map design than most before, and to navigate this you have a parachute. Treyarch literally compared its verticality to something like Die Rise, which I'm not saying Die Rise is perfect or even particularly good, but the verticality aspect does almost nothing interesting for the gameplay in the Reckoning because you have instant teleporters to get to places at any time, so they may as well just be a door or your parachute, meaning that there really isn't much creative thought required on how to uniquely traverse the map, which is what makes verticality itself inherently interesting from a design perspective. When you look at Die Rise, if you want to know how to get across this gap, you have to creatively think to use the trample steam to launch yourself and propel you to the other side. Die Rise's entire gimmick is its verticality, and that is what plays into the gameplay of that map, which again, I'm not even saying is inherently good, this amount of verticality for a zombies map, but it is what makes it interesting. The Reckoning, however, is just like every other Black Ops 6 map, you know, aside from a couple of small things. It's got a very simple Pack-a-Punch quest design, which leads directly into the main Easter egg, but you don't need to know how to creatively traverse the map, meaning that its verticality is kind of a non-factor. The Pack-a-Punch quest, however, does lead directly into the main Easter egg. Now, here's where I mentioned it gets a little bit interesting. Reckoning does something fairly unique by having a bow-like structure to its quest. At a certain point, you have to make a decision on who you want to help. Depending on what your answer is, you'll either serve Blanchard or Dr. Panos, and your quest for upgrading the Wonder Weapon will be slightly different, which will in turn give you a different Wonder Weapon by the end of it. From this point though, the rest of the steps afterwards pick back up as normal, but it's neat having different quest paths you can choose to do. This even goes for the map's ending and boss fight. You literally have to choose who you want to help, and this either initiates a sequence fighting against Sam or the AI or Richtofen. The map's aesthetics are honestly not anything out of the ordinary other than the small nods that it makes to other zombie stuff. For example, the paperweight in Richtofen's office is the house from Revelations. This map even makes mention of Dr. Monty, but otherwise it's Janus Towers, it's a facility, which is a controversial term now in the zombies community, and there are a few other neat looking areas, you know, the Nexus computer lab where you have all of these dark ether mushrooms, but this seems to be really the response to anything not really having any atmosphere or is just slap purple on it. But it's an alright map to me to look at personally. It's not anything outstanding or super interesting, but it's not an eyesore to look at either. The boss fight arenas do take place in the same area, meaning aesthetically they are the same no matter which path you choose. I thought it would have been kind of a neat idea to maybe have, depending on who you choose, take you to a different location for the finale sequence, but I understand this is a boss fight arena and everything takes place on the Janus Towers rooftop. Interestingly though, these bosses vary widely in difficulty. Richthofen being much more hardcore than Samantha to take down. Richthofen is one of the hardest bosses in Zombies history, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Like, you don't really need to learn the boss attack patterns the way that you would learn Mephistopheles in IW Zombies. You kind of just figure out a way to cheese it, either through smoke grenades, ether shroud, or something along those lines. Samantha, on the other hand, is much tankier. She has a much bigger health bar, yet only a handful of moves that are pretty intuitive to learn. As much as I don't think Reckoning takes any big chances or swings with its gameplay mechanically, this bow-like Easter egg quest and boss structure is rather unique, admittedly, and could be something that they toy with more going forward. But from a story perspective, don't even get me started on this ending. I mean, I guess it makes it a little better given that Black Ops 7 takes place literally seconds after Black Ops 6 ends, so this moment has much more context, but you know, at the end of every single Zombies game, especially the first 3, the ending of Moon, of Origins, and even of Revelations are shocking one way or another. This, as a moment though, is just so bad. In terms of other stuff though, Reckoning does have some cool things going for it, especially its unique Klaus mini-boss enemy, as well as a unique Easter egg reward to acquire the Aether Blade. However, this is where Treyarch really messed up. They had this Easter egg in the game since launch. However, if you know anything about this quest or how to acquire this Aether Blade, you know that you need to utilize the new field upgrade they added called Mr. Peaks. This was not there from launch, this was added in an update, and you had to acquire it through an event. So there's two things here. Firstly, data miners figured out and solved this Easter egg by force spawning the Mr. Peaks into the game, meaning that they solved an Easter egg that wasn't even technically out yet. But to make things worse, Mr. Peaks was only acquirable in this like 90s action hero event or whatever, and if you didn't get it, it was no longer in the armory, meaning you were completely locked out of doing the side Easter egg if you didn't have Mr. Peaks, until they very recently added it back to the armory so now that you can do it. Having a time-gated Easter egg was not a good idea, I don't think, and Treyarch even knows that, so I think they understood that that was a little bit of a mistake. But still, if you look at the side Easter eggs on Reckoning itself, or even the Aether Blade for that matter, it's a pretty good quest. I enjoyed a lot, and again, it's a unique reward that you cannot otherwise get, and I will always praise that. While it may not be the most memorable map I've ever played for any reason, and again, I don't think the verticality really does anything for the map, it doesn't quite reach the strides that Terminus and Citadel made for itself in my opinion. It's once again a pretty good and serviceable map, just kind of a missed opportunity to not take some chances and big swings with the gameplay in this one. The verticality ends up being a non-issue since teleporting doors and portals make it pretty much meaningless. It's still a pretty fun map, however, and follows Black Ops 6's tried and true formula where they know what works. It's pretty standard as far as BO6 is concerned, and if not for the story ending, it's really not the most memorable map even in Black Ops 6's selection. In terms of other content in between maps, it's worth noting that Treyarch did launch Grief mode as well into all Zombies maps, but it doesn't really play like Black Ops 2's Grief at all. In fact, instead of survival, it's much more objective based, which is fine, but because of a couple changes and that they made recently and a few decisions, for example, allowing Gobblegum into Grief, I don't think it's really balanced or plays that fair, and also pretty much all of the maps play the same, because on Black Ops 2's Grief mode, each map, you know, there was a big difference between cell block Grief and town, for instance. Grief is fine as a game mode in Black Ops 6. I honestly didn't end up playing it very often because I just didn't really care for the objective focus to the gameplay. I really enjoyed Grief back in the day for its pure survival factor, and it really, you know, like streamlined that process. So Grief is fine and it's appreciated for the people that enjoy it, but it's just not exactly my cup of tea. All in all, Black Ops 6 Zombies has been a fantastic addition to the Zombies series, and though it might seem that I've been quite critical of a lot of it, it's because I really care and I want this to succeed and be the best that it possibly can. I will say that I have found Black Ops 6 Zombies to be the most fun I've had on this since the new Coke era. Black Ops 6 by far got the most support. I mean, when you compare this to Cold War, which only launched with one map and then had Outbreak for like 3 or 4 seasons, and I think only ended with 4 round-based maps total, we got a lot more out of this than we did even in those years, and don't even compare Vanguard or MWZ to this. Black Ops 6 did get by far the most support, most maps, and overall content. It innovated hard in the boss fight department and corrected many of the direct criticisms I had of Cold War zombies. While having a very solid core fundamental formula, I would still like to see Treyarch take some bigger swings going forward and to try to make the game hard again in a way that's addicting and satisfying. High rounds, for example, in BO6 are perhaps my least favorite in all of Zombies history, and I spoke about it before, but it's mostly due to the fact that I just don't care for camping mutant injection strategies, which is what almost every single map in BO6 boils down to, or just other camping strategies in general. And what's really ironic about that is, you know, perhaps the game with theoretically the most advanced movement system is the high round game that you move around the least in. I would also like to see them do away with the minimap, or make it so that only directed mode has a minimap but standard does not. Even just removing that, I think, already brings so much more immersion personally to the gameplay. Black Ops 6 ended the season with an extremely solid map lineup and some very memorable moments. The story, unfortunately, however, was literally just wheel spinning until just the last few seconds. Black Ops 6 overall, though, is still my favorite game in the new Coke era by far, and I think under the right conditions, this very solid formula they have has the chance to evolve past itself into something incredibly special. And for the fans out there of Coca-Cola Classic, well, maybe there's still some hope left yet.